His negotiating tactic, negotiating strategy to bully, to impose tariffs, to talk down the opponent, the rival, or whoever is the country with whom he is negotiating.
In the last few months, I spent a lot of time analyzing what are the underpinnings, why Donald Trump is so hyper about tariffs. He's been saying tariffs is the most beautiful word in the dictionary. And you have to understand what is his motive.
The great Indo-American friendship, strengthen and deepen the ties further.
A group of countries that are anti the United States, and India is a member of that. Our primary focus will be trade and trade with Canada.
US President Donald Trump has just signed a sweeping executive order that could reshape global trade. The new order slaps higher tariffs on 70 countries, including India, Brazil, Canada, and Switzerland, just days before a key trade deal deadline. So, what exactly has Trump announced, and how could this impact the global economy? Let's break it down for you. So what did Trump announce? Trump's new order raises import tariffs from 10% to as high as 41% on US trading partners. The new tariffs will take effect in 7 days. Now, according to US officials, these rates are based on each country's trade imbalance with the US and whether they align with Washington on economic and national security issues. According to CNN, the baseline tariff for goods coming into the US will remain at 10%, but only for countries with which the US enjoys a trade surplus, that is, nations from which the US imports less than it exports. For about 40 countries with which the US has a trade deficit, a 15% tariff will now apply. While some countries have managed to avoid the worst, Thailand, for example, saw its proposed tariff slashed from 36% to 19% after last minute talks. Countries like India, which is at 25%, and Vietnam 20%, who are both considered key to Washington's China pivot, now face significant barriers, raising concerns about long-term US supply chain strategies. Even the United States-Mexico-Canada agreement members, once considered exempt, aren't spared. Now, quickly let's have a look at which countries are hit the hardest. Let's start with India. India will face a 25% tariff along with an additional penalty due to its continued purchase of Russian oil and military equipment. Negotiations between India and US have stalled over access to India's agriculture sector, with New Delhi vowing to protect its labor-intensive farming industry. This has drawn criticism from the opposition in India as well and led to a slump in the rupee. Then, tariffs on many Canadian goods have been raised to 35%, with Trump accusing Ottawa of failing to curb fentanyl trafficking into the US. While Canadian goods under the North American Trade Pact still enjoy certain exemptions, this hike specifically targets fentanyl-related concerns. Meanwhile, Mexico has been granted a 90-day reprieve to negotiate a broader trade deal with the US. However, even with its extension, 25% tariffs will continue to apply on autos, while steel, aluminium, copper will be taxed at 50%. Trump linked these tariffs to Mexico's role in the fentanyl crisis and called for the country to eliminate its non-tariff trade barriers. South Korea successfully negotiated a reduced 15% tariff down from the initially threatened 25%. As part of the deal, South Korea pledged $350 billion in investments in projects across the United States chosen by Trump. In a significant change, tariffs in Pakistan have been lowered from 29% to 19%. This reduction contrasts with the steep hikes faced by other nations, reflecting shifting trade dynamics between the two countries. China is still in talks with the US ahead of an August 12 deadline to reach a durable trade agreement. Earlier in May and June, both countries reached preliminary deals to pause their escalating tariff war, but a final agreement is yet to be concluded. Now, Trump's message is clear. In a post on Truth Social, Trump wrote, "The August 1st deadline is the August 1st deadline. It stands strong and will not be extended. A big day for America." This means countries that don't strike deals by the deadline will face full tariffs. Now, why is Trump doing this?
Trump is negotiating a deal with any country. Is negotiating right now by imposing or threatening to impose these tariffs, or talking the other country down, in this case India. He is trying to negotiate at gunpoint. So he has and he thinks he can get his way with doing this?
If you have a trade deficit with a country, then you are being taken advantage of. And US has a trade deficit with many countries. And a trade deficit basically means that, you are importing more things from another country and exporting less in value terms. Now, he announced a broad set of tariffs. India was also one of the countries which got slapped with tariffs, and that was around 26% tariffs against India on April 2nd. They came into play on April 9th. Uh, in fact, 10% of that came into play on April 5th. In the last few months, I spent a lot of time analyzing what are the underpinnings, why Donald Trump is so hyper about tariffs. He's been saying tariffs is the most beautiful word in the dictionary. And you have to understand what is his motive. He looks at trade deals, trade deficits as a negative, right? That's not a mainstream understanding of deficits. The way trade happens is that one country may have a deficit with another country, but may have a surplus with another country, and those two countries may have a deficit. So the world is better off with trade. There is just overwhelming evidence of that. Having a deficit is not a bad thing. The problem with Donald Trump is that he thinks only a balanced trade is the right trade, which means it has massive repercussions then for policy, which means he will keep putting tariffs till the trade is balanced. The only way trade can get balanced between India and US is if US starts importing less material from India, or if India starts importing a lot more from US. So either India will be forced to buy more stuff from US to balance the trade, or the US will have to cut down its purchases from India. That will make everybody worse off. So I think this is a phase, and I think we talk so much about what percentage of tariff is he putting now and what is he doing. If the idea is to bridge the trade gap, not have a deficit, then there will be no end to this mayhem. And this I wrote in one of the pieces, that if you understand that Donald Trump is not a free trader in that sense, right? He's not saying that cut down your barriers, let's have free trade. He's saying, even if you have free trade, and if you have a deficit, if I have a deficit with you, I will then slap tariffs on you. So, this cannot happen. Like, you cannot play cricket and say that, okay, whatever runs I make in the first innings, you also make the same runs in your first innings. This is not how the game is played.
Trump says the goal is reciprocal trade, meaning countries should pay tariffs similar to what US goods face in their markets. He's linking trade policy to national security issues like fentanyl trafficking from Canada and Mexico as well. And Trump wants to pressure countries into new trade agreements that he believes are more favorable to US businesses and workers. Now, how does this impact countries? India could see major pressure on exports like textiles, leather, and agriculture. The rupee has already seen volatility.
The way to understand is that how much would be the impact. Now, if you look at, I was just looking at what do we sort of import, what do we export to US? The biggest things that we export are electrical equipment, pharmaceutical products, gems and jewelry, minerals, chemicals, textiles, carpets, and food articles like fish. Almost $2 billion of fish we export. So all of these will be affected. Anybody who's involved in, if you're selling your product to the US market, then you will be impacted because of the tariff. But it will differ on 2-3 counts. One is how efficient you are to deal with this tariff, in the sense that, suppose you are making a profit of 30%, can you take a hit of 25% tariff and still continue to make a profit? Or were you already on a very thin margin and a 25% tariff totally blows you out of the water and you can't deal with that? The other factor that will come into play, and we don't have answers to this immediately, is that who's the competing country or producer to your product? Suppose I was exporting a shirt to the US, right? And that product got slapped with a 25% tariff, and my competitor, say in Bangladesh or Vietnam, is not given that same kind of tariff, then they are better off and they'll make, they will take the market share. So all those factors will also come into play. And that is where we'll have to figure out whether our competitors in different commodities that we export, what is happening to them. For example, US now has a trade deal with, say, a Vietnam. So wherever we are competing with Vietnam, we are likely to get hit more. But if US doesn't have a trade deal with, say, Bangladesh, then perhaps we will not be as affected because Bangladesh might also be on the receiving end. It would also matter whether Bangladesh gets slapped with a 15% tariff or a 35% tariff, because all these are things that will hit on the margins. And now, as far as the bit you talked about, the farmers, MSMEs, and entrepreneurs, now there is both in domestic politics in this and a larger trade reality, that in the pre-Donald Trump world where we had World Trade Organization rules where we said that all countries of the world will trade, in those trade rules, there were some carve outs for poorer countries, for developing countries. Developing country farmers have smaller land holdings, are poorer themselves. They do not use as much technology. They do not use as much of fertilizers and chemical pesticides. And they don't have the kind of productivity gains that, say, a farmer in a developed country has. So many of these sectors were protected under WTO rules. But Donald Trump is not following WTO rules, which says that, okay, for the richer countries, okay, be a little tougher, on trade and be a little lax on trade rules for farmers in India. And he wants access to, farming products and all these. This is where domestic politics comes into play. As we've seen, so many episodes we've done on farmers, there's a lot of angst, in India about amongst the farmers. They are really struggling for a long period. And if you open up trade and foreign food grains and food articles start flooding into Indian markets, this would have a very bad impact on Indian farmers. I don't know so much about MSMEs necessarily exporting to the US, but the point is that once you open up your economy wholesale to global trade, there can be very sharp trade-offs. Even in a country like US, they have a very anti-globalization mood right now, primarily because they feel that globalization hasn't helped them. It has worked against them. So you can totally understand that a country which is like India, which is poorer, doesn't have as much, at an individual level, doesn't have as much of resource to sort of tide over a tough period. They can find it really tough to deal with the upheaval that trade brings. Trade may open up a new opportunity for somebody who was a farmer, but that period of 6 months or 5 years before that farmer becomes something else is very tough. Our governments may not have resources.
In Canada, a big blow to manufacturing and metal industries worsening trade tensions despite the North American Trade Pact. Mexico gets temporary relief but must finalize a deal soon. Autos, steel, and copper still face heavy duties. China, the biggest unknown, a failure to reach a deal could reignite a full-blown trade war between the world's two largest economies. Now let's talk about the global impact. These tariffs could disrupt global trade flows, raise export costs, and create uncertainty for industries worldwide. Markets are already reacting with volatility as countries rush to negotiate last-minute deals with Washington. For the US, Trump hopes the move will bring back jobs and manufacturing, a key campaign promise. With the new tariffs set to take effect soon, the next few weeks are critical for global trade. Will countries give in to Trump's demands, or will this spark a new era of trade wars? We'll keep tracking all the developments for you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more such explainers.